You suck with Arkhan the Black. Admit it. Go on, admit it. Please, I'll do anything you want. And today I'm going to tell you why. Are you constantly displeasing Nagash? Do your old bones rattle at the thought of facing yet more Brettonian cavalry? Well, don't worry. Your even more evil British twin, Arkhan the Blake, is here to look after you. And today we'll be diving deep into why you suck with Arkhan the Black, the Followers of Nagash, and the Tomb Kings as a faction. After today's video, when asked whether you will be able to master this Tomb King campaign, you'll be able to confidently say, "Yes, I can." My name is Blake and I bid you my fondest welcome to Blake's Takes, where today I'm going to give you my take on why you're just awful with Arkhan. Is my take hot or not? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. After this video, you will no longer let the world bend you to its whims. That is the thinking of a mere mortal. You will not heed the voice of this world, my child. Instead, you will command it. You will shape it to your will. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 1. You don't blitz the Brettonians. You start at war with the Knights of the Flame. These guys aren't too difficult to take out. Your starting force will make quick work of their army. Use your bats to slay the enemy's trebuchet, and your hex wraiths and crypt ghouls to mop up their archers. These are the only units in the Brettonian force which will prove any kind of threat to your army. When your vampire count units have finished taking care of their ranged contingent, have them circle around and finish the Brettonian front line. Once that's taken care of, attack the city of Lashiek. Again, use the same principle. Bats, ghouls and hex wraiths onto their archers, then envelop their front line once you've finished killing them. Now, with Lashiek under your control, you should immediately pick yourself up another lord. Arkhan's faction ability is he gets to start with an additional army, which is invaluable for the Tomb Kings. You should immediately utilise this. Some Tomb King lords have excellent skills such as Prepared here, which gives a massive 20% increase to your ammunition and a 5% missile damage buff. Extremely useful for when you start rolling out your skeleton archer stacks. Now recruit more forces and end your turn. Remember, your forces are free, so make sure to fill both of these armies up with whatever you can as quickly as possible. Every turn you need to try and be recruiting more forces to supplement both of these fledgling armies. When you have run out of vampire unit capacity to recruit, I strongly advise recruiting skeleton spearmen over their swordsman counterparts. The reason for this is the spearmen variant has a bonus versus large and better melee defense than their swordsman counterpart, and thus will survive combat for longer. Neither of these units will do much damage, but the skeleton spearmen and their higher melee defense will hold out for longer. And that's all these units do. Hold the line whilst your specialist troops deal the damage. So I never bother hiring the swordsman variant, I only ever recruit the spears. You will notice that there are other Brettonian factions to the north of you. Exemplars of a verminous breed, survivors of a war to claim these lands and their failed attempts at reinforcement. Their continued survival renders them anomalous, and anomalies will not be tolerated at this stage of Nagash's grand design. You must engage with these creatures quickly so you may rectify the anomaly of their continued existence. The reason you have to act fast is your units will rapidly become obsolete to Brettonian cavalry, should you let them appear on the battlefield in the early stages of your campaign. However, your crypt ghouls will tear through their weak, unarmoured infantry with ease, so you must press this advantage quickly before their cavalry starts showing up en masse. Now, turn your attentions to Thegan's errantry. Attack the city of Martek, which should have an army garrisoned in there. At this point in the campaign, this should be the only settlement they have. Now, I actually recommend attacking this settlement head-on with your fledgling armies. The siege map of Martek has a lot of foliage for you to hide your vanguard deploying direwolves and hex wraiths in. You can use this to annihilate the Brettonians' trebuchet, as well as wipe out their archers, which are basically the only threat to your undead legions. Hide them at this point here, and you'll be able to flank around undetected. They won't have anything fast enough to stop your direwolves from chowing down on their unfortunate trebuchet crews.
Yoink.
Now we move on to the Chevalier de Lyonesse, Rapunzel and her ill-begotten kind. Their continued existence is a source of great aggravation to our Lord Nagash. I wonder what drives their futile defiance. This war is already lost. Attack and take the settlement of Al-Hakik. Occupy the settlement. There's not much point sacking settlements as the Tomb Kings in the early game, as you don't get much gold and your settlement buildings are very expensive to repair. By taking this settlement quickly, you'll deprive Rapunzel of her access to recruit more cavalry, and because of the terrible balance of power offered by your skeleton stacks, she will likely come to you, thinking you an easy target. The fight with Rapunzel will be a bloodbath, or technically a bone bath. But remember that as long as your lords, heroes and hexwraiths survive, you're fine. The rest of your forces are entirely disposable and can be replaced for free. You'll just need to spend some time recruiting them. So you should expect to take some losses from this fight. That's just part of the Tomb King play, baby. Use your Fellbats to attack the trebuchet they'll be fielding. They should very quickly be able to pick that off. They'll also be invaluable in clearing up any archers they might have, and drawing the attention of cavalry when they land. So they're fantastic distractions. Your Hexwraiths will be invaluable in smashing the enemy's cavalry. Have the Hexwraiths charge into the cavalry and follow it up with Crypt Ghoul support. The combination of the Frostbite debuff and poison will slow them to a crawl, allowing you to pursue and attack them in the rear when they try to withdraw. The trouble is, at this early stage of the campaign, you'll only be able to do this on one flank, as you'll only have one unit of Hexwraiths. Don't worry, the centre of your forces will be comprised of your free skeleton spearmen and archers, and if they're wiped out, that is of very little consequence to you.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
You may think it a good idea to engage Rapunzel with your Tomb Prince. I would warn against this. Rapunzel will firmly, yet elegantly clap the bony cheeks of your now panicking prince. My advice is to pin her down with skeleton spearmen and drop spirit leeches on her with Arkhan safely tucked behind the spearmen front line. With their cavalry and archers gone, you will now grind their morale into the dust, and victory will be yours. Remember to chase down any of the fleeing combatants to make the clear up of this faction easier. Ensure Rapunzel does not escape by getting your Hexwraiths to surround and slow her. So, remember, your first turns as Arkhan should be of extreme aggression. You need to wipe out all of the Brettonians north of you before they start fielding more of their heavy cavalry. You must take advantage of your Crypt Ghoul vampire units, which are excellent at destroying Brettonian infantry, and you must be sure to preserve your Hexwraiths for the fight with Rapunzel. They're your only unit which will be able to chew through the heavily armoured cavalry that she'll be fielding. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 2. You don't know how to use Arkhan. Arkhan is a powerful legendary lord with some excellent abilities and skills which can turn the tide of any battle. But do you know how to use him? Your starting forces really struggle against single entity units and heroes, but Arkhan's Spirit Leech spell will allow you to progressively whittle one of these down throughout the course of a battle. Now, overcasting Spirit Leech only increases the range of the spell cast. It does not increase the damage or duration of the spell, so bear this in mind when using it. You should always avoid overcasting this spell if at all possible, because it will cost more winds of magic and has the possibility of backfiring, causing damage to Arkhan. Only overcast this spell if you need the added range. The rest of Arkhan's magic is really good as well. I like to pick his magic up first, getting down to Greater Arcane Conduit, Fate of Buna, and the Purple Sun of Xerius. Then I start working on his unique line of skills as soon as they become available at level 10. He has some truly excellent abilities in there, so these should be a focus. Firstly, you can pick up the Curse of Undeath, which gives him the excellent Vampire passive. When you cast a spell, you get a small burst of healing which can actually revive your own troops. This happens across your army. It also comes with a passive 9% replenishment rate for his army, so it's pretty good. Then you have the Legions of Death ability, which gives massive stat boosts to all of your vampiric units faction-wide, effectively compensating for the fact that they don't have any redline skills. I cannot state how important these buffs are for your vampire auxiliaries. It turns them into absolute powerhouses, and it applies to all of your lords. Then you get the Lich King, which provides you extra capacity and recruitment rank for your Lich Priest wizards, which is great because it frees up your resources to acquire other lords and heroes. And finally, the Right Hand of Nagash. This gives an extra 10% health to Arkhan, whilst also buffing recruitment rank of your vampire units faction-wide, whilst also giving you extra Winds of Magic power reserve for Arkhan himself. These are some fantastic skills, do not skip them. Now, what's really interesting about Arkhan is his chariot. When he gets access to this, he transforms from a mage, which you really don't want to use in combat, into an infantry blending killing machine. He is just so strong on his chariot as he mulches through formations while spamming spells on the enemy. His floating chariot flies through enemies with ease, and he's very easy to pull out of combat, so once he's on his chariot, don't be shy about throwing him into the fray. Remember to use him as a hit and run piece. Don't leave him in a prolonged combat if you can, because all of the damage which he deals comes from his charge. If you can, try and equip him with the Banner of Swiftness when you find one to make him even faster. When he's mounted on his chariot, he truly becomes an exceptional legendary lord who can not only heal his entire army and generate a ludicrous amount of Winds of Magic with Greater Arcane Conduit and the Right Hand of Nagash, but he also offers faction-wide buffs to your unique vampire units. If you look at how many vampire units you can acquire per Gravehill, for 2,000 gold at tier 1 you get 4 Fellbats, 4 Direwolves and 4 Crypt Ghouls, which are all buffed massively with extra melee attack and charge bonus, whilst also coming out with at least 3 chevrons of experience. It's just an absolute heap of value this early into the campaign. I like to pop down a lot of Gravehills for precisely this reason. Finally, you should definitely pick up Arkhan's quest artifacts because they also deliver a lot of value. The Tomb Blade of Arkhan gives you a free skeleton warrior summon, which you can use multiple times over the course of a battle. Really useful for helping Arkhan get out of any sticky situations he might find himself in. Then there's also the Staff of Nagash, which buffs your Wind of Magic recharge rate even further. Both exceptional pickups, you should definitely get them. Honestly, as legendary lords go, he is truly excellent, delivering faction-wide value and being an absolute monster on the battlefield. So remember, Arkhan is a fantastic spellcaster. Pick up his spells and Greater Arcane Conduit, then start working on his unique line of skills which grant fantastic faction-wide bonuses to your vampire units. Once Arkhan is on his chariot, feel free to toss him into the battle. He'll blend infantry up with his massive charge bonus, and he'll be able to pretty quickly disengage from a fight. Equip him with the Banner of Swiftness to supercharge his movement speed. Have him spam spells which will in turn heal all of your units with his unique Line Vampire passive. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 3. You don't release the souls. No, not like that. Like this. The Casket of Souls is an extremely potent artillery piece for the Tomb Kings. It is only accessible by performing this ritual here, the Great Incantation of Tahoth. The ritual becomes available when you own 20 units, i.e. a full stack. And I highly recommend picking one of these units up as early as you can so you can rain sweet blue death down on your early game enemies. These things are absolute monsters at destroying lightly armoured infantry, something which your enemies neighbouring you will be fielding a lot of in the early game. Nestle them at the back of your formations to rain unholy death down on your enemies. They're a fantastic artillery piece which are excellent in any early game Tomb King army. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 4. You don't know how Arkhan's armies work. The Tomb Kings have an excellent selection of tools for you to avail of to ensure that your enemies join you in the sweet peace of unlife. But do you know how to use them? Your early game is tough. You have various skeletons to tide you over as replaceable chaff, but as Arkhan you get access to your vampire units, which we've already covered in Reasons 1 and 2, so I won't go into too much detail on them here, but they're very strong and will be the bedrock of your aggressive early game strategy. Now, you won't always have access to the vampire units. You may have run out of slots. So with other early game armies, your archers are going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting as the primary damage dealing component of them. Stick them behind your skeleton spear wall to pepper the enemy with arrows. They're not going to win any archery competitions, but they're surprisingly capable and will do well if you have enough of them. They're also very useful in walled sieges as they can arc their shots to hit enemies behind the walls. Your archers are a bit of a staple and will be useful to you even into the late game. You'll be able to recruit a lot of them. Sheer volume of fire will carry the day. Your chariots are also a good choice in the early game for bulldozing infantry. You get a large number of them in a unit, whilst also being able to access them at settlement level 1. Their main downside is the amount of micro you need to use them effectively. You need to keep them moving. The best way to do this is to attack a unit and then almost immediately give a movement order as soon as they've struck the foe. The trick is to keep their momentum up so they don't get bogged down. A key point to remember with your chariots is the archer variant at tier 2 has the exact same stats as the melee variant. They just have the added bonus of some archers on top as well. So feel free to toss these into melee exactly the same way as you would your regular chariots. Ushabti are an interesting one. The melee variant, which you unlock at level 2, may look intimidating, but due to their low melee attack, they really struggle to deal much damage. You should still build the Ushabti building, however, as at level 3 you gain access to Ushabti with great bows. These guys are excellent long-range single-entity snipers. They also retain very similar close quarters prowess to their melee counterparts. Nevertheless, you should be recruiting both of these because they're free and a better unit than skeleton spears. Your cavalry at level 1 and 2 is pretty lackluster. Skeleton horsemen, Nehekaran horsemen, and your archer cavalry aren't great units, but they have their uses as screening forces in the early game. When you hit tier 3 though, and get the Necro Serpent Nest, you start getting some exceptionally strong units out of there. The Sepulchral Stalkers are an excellent anti-large monstrous infantry with a vicious ranged attack. These guys bring a lot of utility to the battlefield and are absolutely worth picking up. Then you also get the Necropolis Knights, an excellent monstrous cavalry unit, which is also a construct. Great charge bonus, high damage, and well armoured. They're not very quick, but they're also not very slow. A good, well-balanced shock cavalry. As your unit caps are determined by the number of military buildings you have, you must remember to keep building duplicates of military buildings throughout your campaign, especially for units which you may consider a staple, something which you'll be using throughout the campaign. For example, chariots are good in the early game, but I find their usefulness wears off quite quickly into the middle and late game, so I don't invest too heavily into them as they're very micro-intensive. Ushabti, Tomb Guard, and Sepulchral Stalkers, however, remain useful throughout a playthrough, so ensure I've built a lot of their recruitment buildings for them in every province. Unlike other factions, you will often want to be duplicating buildings across your provinces to bump up capacity for the troops you're using. Don't be shy about putting down multiple copies of the same building all in the same province. There is no downside to doing this. Tomb Scorpions become available at tier 3, a very strong anti-infantry construct. These things used to be incredible, but have since been toned down a fair bit. They're still very good though due to their outrageous animation set, which has them bob and weave all over the battlefield, making them very hard to pin down, and ranged units will have a tough time hitting them due to their comparatively low profile. You should definitely pick these guys up. They're very good. Bone Giants, on the other hand, are pretty average. When they hit, they do amazing damage, but they're not very accurate, and their reload speed is pretty shocking. I find they're not really worth the cost in campaign, but sometimes I'm partial to building a couple just to see those arrows fly from downtown.
Nice.
They're not bad, but you may want to save the build slot for level 5, where you unlock some truly world-ending forces. Speaking of which, Kemrian War Sphinxes are basically massive single-entity chariots. Your generic lords all get access to a Kemrian War Sphinx as a mount option, so mastery of the War Sphinx and how to use them effectively is crucial to get the most value out of your lords as well. These things are fearsome anti-infantry specialists. Use them to charge into infantry, disengage, then charge back in again. The trick is to keep them moving. When they're standing still and stuck in blobs of infantry, their normal attacks are actually pretty mediocre. Their charge animation, however, is wild, as they knead your enemies into dough.
Make bread like a good cat! Go on! Be my little baking boy! Yeah! Yeah, there he is! Something smells good in here! Baked goods!
Then you have the Necrosphinx, a powerful anti-large construct which will absolutely clap the cheeks of anything it sees, but particularly large creatures. Cavalry, monsters, nothing will be able to stand for long against its scything talons. These things are the best units on your roster and should be picked up as soon as you have a tier 5 settlement. When you start fielding enough Necrosphinxes, then the game practically wins itself. Then you have the Hero Titan, Yeah, I'm going to attack on Hero Titan. They suck. This guy is just a big, slow, ponderous monster. His stats are strong and he can cast a few spells, but because of his massive height and crawling movement speed, he's very susceptible to being shot, and it's very hard to get him to the places you need him. Pair this with the massive cost of building its recruitment building, and I don't bother with them. The Necrosphinx and War Sphinx are all you need for late game constructs. Finally, onto your spellcasters, you get access to Lich Priests, who are your only form of spellcaster outside of Arkhan himself. By default, you can only get Death Magic, Light Magic, and Nehekara Magic. You can also unlock Shadow Magic by picking up the Book of Nagash found in Karak 8 Peaks. Your Lich Priests aren't very good magic users as wizards go. They only have access to a skeletal mount, they can't fly as a lot of other spellcasters can, and you have quite limited laws of magic with them. Nehekaran magic I think is probably the weakest. The main benefit to this law of magic is the passive heal and resurrection you get from the Restless Dead. The spells themselves though aren't great. The Incantation of Vengeance is probably my favourite spell out of them. It damages enemies and slows them. The Skull Storm is a pretty bad vortex spell as vortex spells go. It flies off on its own very quickly and I find it often misses where it should be. The rest are buffs and debuffs. The best way to use Nehekara magic I find is to spam a low cost spell like the Incantation of Vengeance so you can get the passive healing. Anyway, I recommend going for either Death Magic or Light Magic. Death Magic has some excellent offensive spells which Arkhan will have been showing off like Fate of Buna and the Purple Son of Xerius. Light Magic also has some good offensive spells, but it's also got the Net of Amintok. The Net of Amintok is exceptional for armies which have many ranged units in them. It allows you to pin down enemies into your firing lines and delete them. I tend to go for a light wizard if I have a ranged heavy army, so I can cast the Net of Amintok, and a death wizard if my army is mainly focused on melee, such as constructs and necrosphinxes and the like. So, remember, your early game damage will come from your vampire units, archers, and maybe a few chariots. Use your skeleton spearmen to hold up the enemy's front line so your fast-moving specialists and missile attacks can do the damage. Chariots are a good pickup in the early game, but aren't as helpful in the middle and late game, I find. And remember to keep building those recruitment centres for units which you're actually using. You need to ensure you're keeping up with the demand for good units necessary for your armies. As armies themselves will be in short supply, you need to make sure that you have the best units possible to make them the most effective they can be. The Tomb Kings have an excellent array of different tools to get the job done, but only when you start hitting tier 3 and beyond in your settlement is where you'll get access to your truly potent toys. Oh, I forgot about Carrion, how could I? They're bad, don't recruit them. If you're playing as Arkhan, Felbats are just a much better option. If you're not playing as Arkhan, then I still wouldn't recruit these. I'd rather a unit of skeleton spearmen. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 5. You bite off more than you can chew. The critical weakness of the Tomb Kings in the early game is you are limited in army capacity. Arkhan, however, mitigates this somewhat by being able to recruit an extra one from turn 1, which is a massive buff and should be exploited immediately. Now, the trouble is, you're not liked by basically anyone around you, so you are guaranteed to end up in multi-front wars with a capped amount of forces you can bring to bear on your enemies. You must be aggressive in your first turns, but this will also act as a double-edged khopesh and draw the ire of your immediate neighbours, leading to declarations of war from everyone, and you may not be able to defend yourself from the onslaught. Well, have no fear. The trick to manage this is a simple one.
The guy I'm really looking for, wink, is Mr. Bribe, wink, wink.
It's a ring toss game.
That's right, bribe your enemies. For example, Clan Moors declared war on me, but I really wanted to finish off Scarbrand before he got any more powerful than he already was, as well as dealing with other issues in the south. I had just taken the Death Gorge and Queek appeared. I knew there was no chance of me holding the settlement, so I gave it to him in return for peace. It's important to recognise your limitations, especially as the Tomb Kings. You won't be able to be everywhere at once because of the fixed army capacity system. Sometimes it's worth appeasing a foe to give yourself breathing room. Toss them a piece of land if you can to stop further unwanted wars from happening. It can save you a massive headache by allowing you to focus your limited armies on the enemies you need destroyed. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 6. You don't understand your technology tree. Now, the Tomb King technology tree is rather complex as tech trees go. Don't worry, your old pal Blake has got you. You start by having to research one of the 6 wisdoms. These, once completed, will give you 1 extra army capacity, but also a large 30% debuff to your research rate. So the idea being, once you're on a research tree, you stick with it at least for a little while, and as the wisdoms take 15 turns to research at your base research speed, this will become considerably longer if you just jump from wisdom to wisdom. The techs on each wisdom tree all research either immediately with the cost of canopic jars or gold, or in just a couple of turns for the unit modifiers. So it's definitely worth picking up a few of the techs on the tree to buff your forces. The Tomb King research tree gives you a lot of choice on what to research first, but you need to remember that you'll only be buffing the units that you can currently recruit. For example, there wouldn't be much point in me getting Thutep of the 3rd Dynasty early on, because he buffs your tier 5 Sphinx units, which you won't get access to until much later in the campaign. I really like to pick up the wisdom of the 2nd Dynasty as my first choice. Firstly, because the technologies in there buff archers with extra reload speed and more damage, nice pickups for your early game damage dealers. Then Rakash of the 2nd Dynasty, the special lord you can recruit, buffs income and public order faction-wide, which is another extremely useful bonus. Then you can pick up a Lich Priest and a Tomb Prince hero for extra gold. Necrotects are very good heroes, but in the early game they're nowhere near as useful as an extra Tomb Prince or a magic user. Their usefulness comes when you start getting constructs into your armies in the mid-game. So I find it easier to amass the gold needed to buy extra early game heroes with gold than the large canopic jar spend needed for a Necrotect, which is fine because I won't be getting a Necrotect in the early game anyway. Then, the Proclamation of the Second Dynasty gives bonus growth and income from post-battle loot. All of these buffs are very useful pickups in the early game, so I think the Second Dynasty is a good one to pursue first. The key thing about the wisdoms is they all follow the same format. The wisdom itself, which gives you extra army capacity, the top right-hand side is where you'll purchase additional heroes, the bottom right-hand side is where you'll research your unit buffs. The top of the wisdom is where you'll find a unique lord, which will often have some pretty potent bonuses, which you unlock with canopic jars, and finally the bottom of the wisdom, where you'll find your proclamations, powerful faction-wide effects, which you unlock by paying 5,000 gold. All of the wisdoms follow this format. Then, at the far end of your tech line, you have these ancillaries, which you can unlock that give your lords certain bonuses. Some of them are very good bonuses, some of them are less good. But if you get all of them, you can unlock a pretty powerful bonus, giving you extra army capacity and some bonuses to global recruitment, which is handy. The key takeaway from this is that you have a lot of choice over your technologies as the Tomb Kings, probably more so than other races. Look at which units you're using and plan your technologies around them. Are you going to be using a lot of Tomb Guard as an example? Well, look at picking up the 4th Dynasty and Pride in Service and Stronger Binding, which buff Tomb Guard massively. Remember that you'll only be buffing units that you can recruit. You can rush Tomb Guard technology, but it's wasted if you're unable to recruit that unit that you're looking to buff. That's why I recommend going for the Second Dynasty first, because the buffs are for units that you will have easy and plentiful access to, your archers. But at the end of the day, the choice is yours. What you will need for a lot of the techs which let you access more heroes and unique lords is canopic jars, which brings me nicely onto reason you suck with Arkhan, number 7. You don't hoard jars. That's right, you're not hoarding these jars. Canopic jars are extremely useful, and you will need a lot of them. Firstly, for research, which I just spoke about. If you want to unlock more special lords or want to pick up some more heroes, you'll need to drop a large bag of these jars down. Secondly, you have the mortuary cult. This fantastic little canopic jar spending centre has some excellent bits and pieces in there which you're going to really dig. Similar to the dwarf oath gold system, you can make yourself some fancy armour and excellent weapons to deck out your lords. Yeah, look at Arkhan, he's all purple, baby. Yeah. Then there's other bonuses you can unlock, such as more army capacity, which is always helpful, and some pretty mediocre units apart from the Venom Knights of Asaph, who are really solid. The rest of them are pretty meh, you probably shouldn't get them. But the other bonuses and the weapon and armour which you can unlock are fantastic, and they really should be sought after. To acquire these, you'll have to have a lot of canopic jars, amongst other things. But in the mortuary cult mechanic, the great unifying currency is canopic jars. You need canopic jars for everything. So how do I go about getting these jars? I hear you cry. Well, firstly you have this skill here, which I like to pick up on all of my lords and heroes. It's the Canopic Jar Hoarder, giving you up to 3 extra canopic jars a turn. Your lords and heroes act as a conduit to get this canopic currency. The more you have of them, the more jars you'll get. Secondly, you can pick up canopic jars as post-battle loot by harvesting organs from your captives, which is dark and effective. But it'll be competing with the Endless March, which gives you money and campaign movement range, which is even more excellent in my opinion. But it's definitely worth taking this option if there's been a small battle and you already have the Restless March buff active. You'll only ever get 30 canopic jars from taking this post-battle option. This 30 canopic jars rule also applies to sieges. If you occupy a settlement, you'll get 30 canopic jars. If you raise a settlement, you'll only ever get 30 canopic jars. Then there's your pyramids, which you can build at tier 3 in a lot of Kemrian desert settlements. These will give a passive income of canopic jars as well as other excellent bonuses, so they're worth picking up. Then there is the Books of Nagash, 2 of which will grant canopic jars. The 7th Book of Nagash will give you 10 canopic jars a turn as a passive income, as well as a 10% research rate buff, which is also very helpful. Then there is the 4th Book of Nagash. It will give you a flat 250 canopic jars. There's not too many ways to get canopic jars, so it's really important to pick up the canopic jar hoarder skill on all of your lords and heroes. The canopic jar currency remains useful throughout a Tomb King playthrough. Reason you suck with Arkhan. Number 8. You don't betray the bold one. Manfred von Karstein.
Boo!
The reviled vampire begins his journey in the deserts of Khemri as well as you, and he represents your only immediate ally early on into the campaign. Now, at the beginning of your campaign, you'll grow to like each other because you share the same enemies. But once those enemies are all gone, you're faced with a dilemma. You see, in order to complete the long victory for the Followers of Nagash and gain this coveted Steam achievement, you'll need to occupy certain Khemrian territories and build pyramids in them. You can't complete the long victory campaign objective without building these pyramids. These pyramid sites will likely be occupied by Manfred at some point, so keeping him alive is, in fact, contradictory to your win conditions. Not only that, the pyramids you can construct provide large faction-wide bonuses, so you're really going to want these territories, whether you're fighting for the long victory campaign objectives or just sandboxing. Manfred is a useful ally at the start of your campaign to put pressure onto your surrounding enemies, but when those enemies are gone, he will no longer be useful to you. Dispose of him and usher in a new age of Nagash. And that's why you suck with Arkhan. Do you agree with my take on this? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And, of course, a massive thank you to my Patreon supporters: D, Joshua Krager, Dinkle250, HunterX2, Robert Diorio, Miktar, and Gonk. I've been Blake, delivering my take. Thank you all so much for watching.